Well, I'm delighted to be here. We're a nice group, and before we start talking, and I do want you to interject, ask questions, comments, please, okay? But tell me, all right, I've been here in Naples 50 years. Who else, 50 years?
More.
Okay.
52. Well, I came in 52.
She came 52.
Wow.
Phew. Okay, then we're just kids. Okay. Some have been, 20 years?
Yeah.
30? 40? Okay. Just a few years. Okay. Well, first let me take you back to let me tell you how we found Naples. In 1967, we received a call from a gentleman called Fingers O'Banion. You just don't forget a name like that. And he was a real estate guy in Fort Myers. And he said, and how he found us in Medina, Ohio, I'll never know. But he said, Everglades Wonder Gardens in Bonita Springs. Did you ever hear of it? No. Well, it's run by the Piper brothers. And Larry said, oh, I know the Piper brothers. They have quite a bit of land down that way. He said, well, it's for sale. $167,000. Are you interested? And Larry said, well, I always wanted to go back to Florida because he was the double for Tarzan, Johnny Weissmuller, at Silver Springs. He was at St. Augustine Animal Park, Gator Park and everything. So I knew someday we would retire to Florida. So anyway, we drove down, and Everglades Wonder Garden's beautiful. Vegetation, the gators and the flamingos. And but it's 3.5 acres. It's bound by the road, the river, and the railroad track. And that wasn't big enough for our collection of animals. So we came on down to Naples, and we happened to visit the Caribbean Gardens. Now, the gardens opened up in February 1954. And do you know who owned the gardens back then?
Fleischmann?
Julius Fleischmann. He had a nickname, Junkie. Not to be disrespectful, he bought property that was on the way out. Property nobody else wanted, and turned it around. For instance, 3rd Street South was his vision. He started that. Remember Zeta's and Mark IV Strike and Ward Shoe Salon? Okay, those were his buildings, and his daughter Joan still manages that. So we visited the Caribbean Gardens, and Larry went up to the office to ask if it'd ever be for sale. And Mrs. Paul said, oh, no. This is Mr. Fleischmann's quiet time. This is where he comes for that. So we went back, and at that time we had our operation at Cedar Point, Sandusky, Ohio. Do I have any Buckeyes here? Okay. Well, I had 30 summers there at Cedar Point. So in the fall of '68, Mr. Fleischmann, Julius Fleischmann, passed on. In February of '69, Charles Fleischmann had a Yale roommate by the name of Bob Munger, who was the president of Cedar Point. And he called and said, Larry, have you ever heard of Naples, Florida? And Larry said, well, yeah, we were vacationed there a couple years ago. And he said, well, there's a place called Caribbean Gardens. We visited. Well, Charles Fleischmann doesn't know what to do with it, and I thought of you folks. So we came back. And long story short, we signed a lease to lease the gardens because the price tag, you couldn't touch it. At that time, they valued it at $17 million. So we entered a lease with the trustees of the Fleischmanns. So that's how we came down to Naples. Our first night Well, let me back up to May. It was Larry's job to hire an architect, a contractor, and me to find a house. And he hired Walt Keller, who was very well known as an architect in Houchin Construction. And I only had a choice at that time of 3 4-bedroom homes for sale in Naples. That was all. One in Port Royal, a lovely home with a very small kitchen. And we asked, are there children around? And the lady said, children? Oh, well, that wasn't for us, was it? So the other one was on Coach House Lane off of Airport. And that seemed like a long way away at the time for our boys, who at that time were 1.5 and 5.5. So we settled on a lovely home in the Moorings on the corner of Ketch and Binnacle. It was just built, and all they had was the carpet down because the gentleman was transferred back to Indiana. So we got to go in and do the drapes and wallpaper and all that good stuff. Now, the side yard, we took our first Christmas picture. Now, if you're familiar with the Moorings, Ketch and Binnacle, there were only 2 houses north of us. No Park Shore, none of the Pelicans, nothing. We did school shopping at W.T. Grant. Okay. Naples Shopping Center had the Publix, and where Office Depot was W.T. Grant. Across the street, where Panera and that center is, that was the Blue Caribbean golf range, driving range. Where Coastland Mall, open field, which, by the way, Coastland Field, that land was owned by the Fleischmans. The building at the corner of Fleischmann and the trail, Mr. Fleischmann built that for the Chamber of Commerce and leased it to them for $1 a year, which in turn promote my garden. And well, it was so slow that the Fleischmann, okay, you remember the big sign we had, which was grandfathered in, even though we repaired it many times until Wilma took it down. There was a pond out there, and during the day they would actually put flamingos out there. Now, flamingos are very flighty, spindly legs. That's how slow Route 41 was, that they could put those delicate birds out there for a few hours a day without any danger to them. Years later, we had to remove that pond because cars kept driving in there. It's a divided highway, folks. Go this way or come out this way, but don't go in the pond. So we removed it after a while. A couple years after we were here, just above 22nd Street, they built an Arby's. And we got a call. There was a bear cub up in the tree right there on 41 where they were going to build our Arby's. So it was a very quiet town. Down at the Four Corners, we had the Gulf gas station. You probably remember that. That was Fleischmann property. In fact, I saw a map of the Fleischmann property. Charles Long was their trustee that I worked with. And the Fleischmann property of like 5th Avenue and 3rd Street was very impressive. And Mr. Long once said, if you have any extra money, buy land up in Estero. Didn't have any extra money. Wish I did. So, but look what Estero is today. But he had great foresight on that because he managed the money for the grandchildren and everyone. So he was a good mentor for me. So back in '69, in September, we brought our animals into the gardens. At that time, they had just the birds and the ducks, the duck vaudeville show. that was there. The only thing is, those birds, they perform in order to get food. That's not the way we trained animals. We gave food as a treat, but never as the source of their food. But anyway, we purchased the collection of waterfowl that they had, and we had it for a couple years until the Blue Angels came to town and did their practice runs over Naples, and we saw 2/3 of our collection go away, scared to pieces. So that's why you'll find a lot of exotic birds around Naples, because they came out of the gardens at that time. We only had to remove one pine tree in order to introduce all our animals to the gardens. And the gardens, Botanical, the trail that Mr. Fleischmann put in is still maintained today. There was a gentleman by the name of Old Sam, and that's all he did all day is rake the wood chips back on the trail. That was his full-time job in order to keep a beautiful manicured look. We started out very simple, okay, because we had the pavilion back there that Mr. Fleischmann put up, and we had our first shows back there, but we had to tear it down because at that time you didn't have treated lumber down here, and so it just started to rot away. When we built our lion and tiger yards, no one had 6-gauge chain link, and no one knew how to put up a 15-foot fence. We had to bring a team out of Alabama, big gentlemen. I mean, they handled that stuff like it was candy. We had to go shopping up at Moss Brothers in Edison Mall. We didn't have any places to buy office supplies. First Sam's Club was up in Fort Myers. We had a wonderful bakery up there too. So basically every 2 weeks off to Fort Myers. Now, Bonita Springs was a problem because you had to time it around the dog track. You didn't want to be on that 2-lane road when everyone was going to the dog track or when everybody was leaving the dog track, because you would be stuck for hours, bumper to bumper traffic. Now, what do you remember some of the things back there at that time?
Oh, I remember there was nothing to do. Kids now say there's nothing to do, but all we could do was drive down 41, up Fifth Avenue, down 3rd Street, go to the end of Port Royal, the Gold Coast, you know, and then we would turn around and come back, and we'd go to Tropics Drive-In and sit there and crack jokes about Pittman's Funeral Home, which was right there. So that was.
It was quiet.
There was. Yeah, I used to sing at the Caribbean Gardens every sunrise service. I would go clumping through there and ruining high heel shoes to sing in the dark. But,
well, the town was quiet. When we got the first McDonald's, we really thought we hit the big time over on East Trail, you know, like we were recognized. We had our operation at Cedar Point. We started there in '64. And when I would make airline reservations, I would say, well, I want to go from Cleveland to Naples. And they'd say, Naples, Florida? I mean, Naples, Italy? No, Naples, Florida. It just was not known as a destination like it is today. So we built the zoo. I'm happy to say that.
Question?
Yes.
Could you give us just a little bit of background on your operation in Ohio and what animals you brought down?
yeah.
The Cedar Point operation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We started in '64. They had empty space on the Midway where a ride did not come in. It was the earthquake ride. And they contacted us if we would put some kind of animal exhibit there. And not knowing how exotic animals would go up there, we put in what we call the baby animal farm. And that went over very well because kids could handle rabbits and ducks and chicks and everything. And so then they asked us if we wanted to be there every year. And we signed a lease, and they gave us an island at the end of the midway. And we had 2 60-foot pontoon bridges that connected us to the mainland. And then we developed our animal exhibits there. We had a huge rondavel house that we enclosed a big tree for our pythons to climb on naturally, and we built the big cat yards. And let me also interject, when our cat yards at Cedar Point and at Naples were before a lot of the municipal zoos gave their animals 5,000 square feet or more. Enrichment and things like that. And I'm writing a book right now, so my mind's going in 1,000 directions. But anyway, we were at Cedar Point for 30 years, and they built up around us. And pretty soon we had, where there was a canal, we had the corkscrew ride. And then after that, we had the Iron Dragon. And so after 30 years, I told them, I want to stay in Naples. And we were the longest running animal attraction and amusement park anywhere, one of our records. But we did animal performances there in a geodesic dome. We concentrated on education. We had guides posted along the trail to explain what animals were there, their behaviors, what they're like, where they're from. So we did approximately 1 million people in 110 days through there. Anything else?
What did you do with the animals during the wintertime? It's cold up in...
They came back to Naples.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Before we had Naples, we had winter quarters up there where they would go indoors.
Yes.
And I think this is one of the reasons that we were interested in leasing the gardens, is we'd have year-round good weather for the animals. So it was a good situation. But 30 good summers up at Cedar Point, very much. And on a sidebar, watch their stock. It's a good stock. Excuse me, the ticker is FUN, F-U-N.
Oh.
It's at a good price to buy right now. It's high, it's in the 40s, it's high as 71, but it pays 5.5%.
That's pretty good.
Very good. We bought 2 houses with it. Yeah, it's very good.
Where did you get the idea for the Tiglons, and what happened to them? What was the end? Because I'd moved away for 10 years.
The Tiglons?
Yeah.
Okay. The Tiglons, in winter quarters, we had a male tiger and a female lioness. And they had chain link between them. And we noticed as the months went by, they were communicating in their own way to each other. And she's sort of rubbing up against the chain link. And so we thought, well, let's just see. And so we opened the door a little bit, and that's the chute type door. And they nosed each other, no aggression. Okay, so the next day we tried a little more. Well, pretty soon we had them living together. And so when she came in season, we let them stay together, and we had 3 beautiful Tiglons. A Tiglon is a male tiger and a female lioness. It only happened once before, and that was on the Ringling Circus, when they were transferring cats after a performance, two got in the same cage together. And that was a single birth female. So our kids were the first triplets and two males and a female. We tried mixing her with another lion or tiger, and she's like, no way. We tried one of the boys with a lioness, and he said, not interested. So whether they were sterile or not, we don't know, but they were happy together. The female Maharani lived to be 18, and Raja and Sultan lived to be 21. Just after their 21st birthday, they passed on. Now, they were born in '69 when we came, and Larry introduced them to the world at the governor's conference with Governor Claude Kirk. And so we got great national publicity with that. We had great breeding records at the zoo. Celebes apes and eland and Tommy gazelles and porcupines, lions, tigers, leopards, all kinds of reptiles, lizards, birds, you name it. We were able to breed it. We had directors of other zoos visit and absolutely drool over the fact that these animals were in such a beautiful landscape, beautiful area. They said, what we wouldn't give to have that for our animals instead of concrete buildings and so on. Now, Larry...
Is the location always the same, the acreage where it is now?
Pardon?
Your Naples location, was it always
Yes.
where it is now?
Yes. Yes. We had 2-lane road in front of us. Where you drive in now was always the entrance, but the parking lot was to the left, and then the big lily pond, and then it was all open. We put up that entrance building and put up all the buildings that you see in the zoo now. It was interesting that we had peacocks at one time. I'd be working, I always have had a home office. To this day, I still have a home office. So I would go over at night when Larry could be with the boys, because I was a mom that wanted to raise her own boys. And so I'm sitting there about 8 o'clock at night, and I hear this strange noise on the roof of that entrance building. What the heck? Who is up there? What's going on? Well, I always kept a gun in my bottom drawer. So I took it and I went out the front door. Peacocks. Cross down the parking lot. Now remember, it's 2 lanes and there's a railroad track over there. They're over there eating grasshoppers. When their tummies were filled, up over the building and back they went. So the second time I didn't bother checking on them. So, and speaking of peacocks, got a call one night. You have an ostrich walking down Goodlet Road. Really? I don't think so. Called the night watchman. He said, of course they're locked up. I said, well, you better go check. It was a peacock walking down. I thought, that gentleman better get over to the zoo and find out what animals are there.
So they were always allowed to just roam free, the peacocks?
Pardon?
Peacocks were allowed to just roam free?
They had free roam for quite a few years. They had some negatives. They liked to roost on the grandstand, which meant the crew had to wash them down every day. They started where children chased them, they would chase back. I put in mounds of annual flowers, and just when the buds were ready to open, they would clean them out. But the final thing was they would go over the fence, and the cars that would be, especially dark cars, that you could see the reflection, they would start poking at it. and we had to do some people's paint jobs for them. So we found they had to go. They went up to Sterrett's egg farm. And can you imagine Goodlet Road used to stop at Pine Ridge Road? That was the end of
It's just
town.
the railroad track in the 50s, early 50s.
Yeah, the railroad track ran all the way down to the depot. And look, we now have Goodlet as 6 lanes. It was just the 2 lanes. It was a sweet little town. When you went to Publix, it was as much social as it was grocery shopping. It was very quiet. To give you an example how quiet, we were going on vacation down to the Cayman Islands. Now remember, I'm living over in the Moorings on Ketchum Binnacle, and we were leaving at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we could hear the lions roar. That's how quiet 41 was, and the whole town was so quiet. You could just hear that I said, they're saying goodbye to us. Yeah. So it was a very, very sweet town. And of course, then we got our park shore, we got all the pelicans, and it's been a good growth. On our street on Ketch, my neighbor was Bill Barnett. It was Jim McLaughlin, who headed up Highway Pavers. It was a good street. Our Jim McLaughlin's son, Patrick, my boys were into skateboarding. We used to have a skateboard park up in Fort Myers that we went to. And we took them on a tour around Florida that they could hit all the skateboard parks. Patrick became a minister and served during, well, he was in the service and just recently got out, and now he is a school teacher. So, and I think the kids bonded quite well because my sons have the same friends that they've always had growing up. And that. Currently, David, after years of being in the animal business, said, "Mom, I'm tired of 24/7. I'm going to start my own business," and he's in photography. Tim, my sons are now 51 and 56, which makes me 81. Tim works as conservation director at the zoo and leads tours to Tanzania almost every year for the zoo. He's chair of the Madagascar Fauna Group. He's also with going to Switzerland next month for CITES. He's been all over, traveling on behalf of the zoo. I have 3 generations following now. My grandson is getting his PhD from University of Illinois this year, and he's in environmental science. So I'm very, very pleased that 3 generations of Tetzlaffs are following.
When did Jungle Larry's become the city zoo? Jungle Larry's became the city zoo when?
Came to the zoo.
Became.
Jungle Larry's?
Changed the name.
Oh, when did we change the name? We gradually start. Larry died in '84. Much too young at age 64. And I'm sorry, I have not introduced my husband in the back row, Bob Behrens. My apologies, dear. God provided 2 wonderful men in my life, Larry and Bob, 2 good Christian men. Bob and I just celebrated last year our 31st birthday, our 31st anniversary. So, but we started out with Jungle Larry's African Safari, and when the animals expanded to South America and Australia and everywhere, we dropped the African to just Jungle Larry's Safari. In 2002, I went to Ted Hudgens, the attorney in town, and said, I want to make the Naples Zoo a nonprofit because I want the people to be able to donate so we can grow. And he said, I don't think you can take a C Corp to a nonprofit. I said, well, we don't know unless you try. So in 2003, I got my nonprofit 301, or 30, yes, thank you. I've been retired since '06. It's leaving, yeah. So we did get our nonprofit. Let me back up to, I dealt with the Fleischmanns until 2004. January 2004, Charles sent down 3 attorneys and to tell me that he wanted to sell the land under me. Now, I had been there since '69, and it was like, oh my goodness. But you see, Mrs. Fleischmann, okay, Julius Fleischmann passed away in '68, Mrs. Fleischmann in '93, and it took 10 years for them to settle the estate. There was vast holdings all over. And so they settled it in 2003, and Charles wanted to divest himself of all Naples property. Just let his sister Joan be down here. And so when he said he was going to put it up for sale, and it was figured at $67 million, of which the zoo property would be $40 million. And so Dave and I talked it over, and I said, why don't you go talk to Fred Coyle? I'd hate to see this property go into concrete and condos. And so my son David went down there, and Mr. Coyle was very receptive to the idea, and so brought it before the Board of Commissioners. And on November ballot, it was, would the residents of Naples buy the land under the zoo? And 73% said yes. So, phew, that was a good thing. So now, instead of Mr. Fleischmann as my landlord, now it's the county. So they looked over the books, and they figured Mr. Fleischmann always took a percentage of what I made. And they took the highest amount and said, that's what we want. I said, well, we have slow seasons, we have high seasons. So we did a little investigating, and we found out that the other owned by the county, like the Children's Museum, the Depot, they paid $1 a year. So my son and them came before the board and said, now, why should you charge us $250,000 a year and others are paying $1? And they said, well, that doesn't seem fair. So they said, okay. So we wrote a check out for $30 so fast to guarantee at least we'll be there 30 years. So, but it's been a good time. Naples has been a good growth. Personally, I have loved working with the animals. I left all my albums with my son. I said, why don't you take them? You're going to get them someday anyway. I just brought a couple that I have. I have a wall in my office. I call it my ego wall, where I've been presented with the key to the city and day named after Larry and I, and some photographs of my boys growing up. And I brought back just a couple, because a lot of people look at me and say, what do you mean you worked lions and tigers? Well, yeah, I trained them. I worked with them.
You had the babies in your house.
Yes, raised them in our home as cubs. And it was a joy. I worked with the Tiglons. In fact, that's a Tiglon with me back there in that one picture. Does it make them safer to raise them? No, not really. Because they don't fear you. So they'll sneak up on you anytime, take a swat at you.
I saw David with lots of cuts.
Yes.
We shared facial stitches at the same time.
Yeah, David's got some scars.
Yeah.
I had a leopard jump me on the back during a performance. Natural reaction, bam, knock her down. I've had chimp bites, and I've had, when we were feeding a snake that wouldn't eat, the rat slipped and that snake just went right up my arm. You pick teeth out for quite a while because you have to pry the mouth open and you have to put your arm down farther because all the teeth are recurved, like fish hooks. So you have to go beyond them, pry the mouth open, then gradually pull your hand out. And then you pick little teeth out for a long time. So, but all in all, the cats, when we start breaking them or training them, we bring them into arena one at a time, and we use a thin dowel with a piece of meat on it, and we will point to the seat and tell them we want them there, and they look at you like you must be kidding. But you just gradually, every time they got a little bit closer, you gave them another treat until finally they got on the seat, and then they jump right off again. And this is a long process. It takes almost 18 months until you have an act that you can count on performing. Like I said, cats raised in captivity, they don't fear you. If you have a wild caught or an import, they want to stay away from you. They just soon find a corner and stay there. But working the leopards and lions and tigers, it's been a joy. Larry and I both did it, but truthfully, David outshined us. He had 17 leopards in that arena. And part of it was a leopard blanket, which means he sat right down on the floor and he could verbally call 7 different cats to come and just plop right on him or around him. And because they had a trust of each other, do you trust them completely? Of course not. They're wild animals. You can't. And you don't, people say, oh, you tame them. No, you train them. You train them to do behaviors, and you basically reward them when they do right. And then after they do it and know their routine, you don't need that anymore. The food's not necessary. It's only an encouragement to get something done. So, and then Dave had 7 tigers. And it was a joy to see 7 tigers roll over all together in unison. And when, yes, dear.
You need to let people realize that 17 leopards, the threat is that in nature they are loners. They never meet each other without killing each other. And to be trained that way, that he can put them on 17 pedestals and not attacking each other, that was one of the bigger things that had to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had each their individual seats. We always had a backup, at least 1 or 2 of them. And I know in our Ohio park, it was a round arena, and I would usually either announce the show or back my son up, and you had to watch the cats. Now remember, we never declawed or never defanged our animals, so just as God made them. And you'd watch the ears, and you know if you have pets at home, Those ears will tell you a lot. And the tail. If you saw that tail just twitching, oh, they were going to do something they shouldn't do. And so I would just softly say, Ebony. And he'd turn around and he'd say, Ebony? And oh, innocent. Oh, gracious. Like it wasn't me. She's telling a story on me. I know she is. You know. So we had a baboon, a Hamadryas baboon named Spanky. My dad was building a new enclosure for a young puma we got, cougar. And he had his tools all around. I mean, animals, they have their own personalities. If you have cats or dogs, you know that. And he's reaching for, I don't know whether it was a hammer, a screwdriver, or what, but he knew it was right here, and he's reaching, and it's not there. And he's looking around, and here is Spanky, who we put out on a long leash so she could have some fun. She's sitting on it. And he'd say, Spanky. Spanky? Finally, slap it in his hand. We had more fun with that baboon. So all during the day, all he had to do is put out his hand and ask for the tool, and it would finally show up. But she just would stretch her foot till she could reach it. Yes.
What about Java? How long did Java live?
Java? The leopard.
What?
Most of the leopards were from 17 to 21 years.
She could jump through that 14-inch in diameter hoop, and David said he knew he could have taken it down to 12.
Mhm.
And I don't know how she got through it.
Yes.
Fly through the air.
Yeah, through the hoop. David also had a leopard. Honey would come to his feet and jump up on him and wash his neck till finally he said, I can't take it anymore. I'm not going to have any skin left, you know. And so he had to discourage her from doing that. Or I think it was Ebony that would be on one perch and jump to him. Yes.
Could you
Did-
give us a little bit more history about the landscaping that is in the zoo previous to you all owning it?
Okay, you're going. I didn't put my hearing aids in. I'm sorry.
Landscaping.
Oh, the landscaping?
Yes.
What about it?
Well, didn't Nerling help design
Okay.
a lot of it?
All right, I'll take you back to 1919. Dr. Henry Neerling, can you imagine Naples in 1919? He bought 13 acres on what we know as Goodlet Road. He's the father of caladiums and developed many, many different types. He lived to be 1929. He was only here with us 10 years. When he passed on, it grew wild until the early 50s, till 1951 or 52. Mr. Fleischmann bought that land plus adjoining land. There still are a few trees that we can date back to Dr. Neerling. But as far as the rest of the vegetation, Mr. Fleischmann put it in, and then every year we've added since then. Basically, whenever we put in a new exhibit, Dr. Abernathy worked for us. He would research, and he would find the vegetation that was from that country, and then put it, so we kept it as authentic as we could on that. But Danielle is now the botanist there, and she's doing a great job. They hired her out of Atlanta, so she is always importing and keeping things up. And if you can imagine, it's a big job. And when Wilma went through, we lost almost 100 little trees that went. We lost one exhibit All the animals were fine, but I was down for a month keeping people on payroll and getting fixed up. And we had other zoos come in and help us clean up. And then, of course, when Irma came through, okay, I sold the house, so I can say it now. But they were talking about with Irma a 10-foot surge coming. And the people at the zoo thought, "Whew, it's going to come in to the zoo. What are we going to do?" I mean, well, we put in the original concrete buildings you see. That's something that we built. And they all had perches in them, so your cats could get up. But some of your smaller things, you know, you only have so much space. So I was up at our Central Florida home, and son Tim calls, and he said, in fact, Bob took the call, and he said, "Pops, could we bring some animals to the house because we don't have any place to put them?" The house isn't quite a year old. I had 90 animals in that house.
In Central Florida?
Here.
Oh, here.
Here, our home in Naples. Yeah. Anyway, the garage was full. I mean, everything was in crates, okay? Everything was in crates. Birds and the two beautiful cougars. Encino? No, not Encino. That's my jaguar. Uno. And the clouded leopards and birds. But the keepers did a magnificent job. They pushed all my furniture back, covered everything with tarps. And of course, I'm stuck up there and I can't get through because of all the warnings. So for 3 days, my house was a zoo, Noah's Ark. Except the clouded leopard, fiberglass kennel carriers, you probably know what those are. Clouded leopards have teeth about this long. And just took the grill work out of that and popped it off and came out. And they go, "Where's the clouded leopard? I don't know, where is it? Where?" They're going through the house. She's in the one bathroom looking at herself in the mirror. So anyway, and my neighbors there never said a word, even though it was the zoo vehicles and trailers coming and everything. Not one word. And when I got down here 3 days later, you could not tell an animal was in there except Jack, the zoo director. He had a team come in there and scrub my house from top to bottom, so you never knew. But they pulled him out. But yeah, I've raised almost everything you can think of in a house. The only thing I could not tolerate for long was primates. They're messy. I don't care how you say it, they're messy. So, anyway, yes.
How young were your boys when you started introducing them to the animals? I mean, I can imagine they were pretty much raised around them, but how young did they start?
6 weeks. Okay. David's first TV appearance was 6 weeks old when he reached out and touched the python. Okay. But yes, they helped us raise all the animals. Our home had the one bathroom that went out to the pool area, and we had the fenced-in yard, and they were real good about taking the cats out there to do their little thing and bringing them back in. Yeah, it was a fun place for the family, or the kids, the neighborhood to come. They could play with.
When did the eco tour and the boat ride start?
I'm sorry.
The boat ride off the river?
When did we start that?
Yes, ma'am.
Bob, do you remember?
No, but he's referring to the boat ride on the river.
Oh, in the lake.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it has no connection to the river. We have the two lakes, Victoria and the Amazon. Was I still at Cedar Point when we put that in? Okay, so that must have gone in, I think, the early 90s. Ralph, my manager, that man was priceless. We all had a champagne appetite with a beer pocketbook. Because of my lease arrangement, I had to operate in the black. I could not be in debt. So every year we balanced the budget. But the islands were already there, and he rip-wrapped them all. And then we did our research, and we got our boats in there. So, yeah.
It has no connection to the river?
What you know is the Gordon River down here in town. Okay, it starts out very narrow up there. It's always been there. But there's no connection, no. No. Are you thinking of Conservancy?
Yeah.
No, I am part of the Conservancy, but some of your boat captains are saying there's a connection.
To the lake?
Yes, ma'am.
No. No, there's ground between us. Okay, if you take our back lake, okay, the perimeter road comes along and then goes along what is that water back there and goes along that and then comes around. In other words, our perimeter road makes a big U, or it originally did, from Goodlet around back to the water and then back to Goodlet again. But there's no water flow there. There's no way you can get from the river into the lake at all. So, and we're all fenced in back there. So, no.
Were those lakes they were man-made or they were natural? The lakes, they already existed,
Mr. Fleischmann put those in,
so they were man-made.
man-made.
There was nothing.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what it was like to be a woman in this field.
Oh, okay. All right. I didn't get to that. Okay. Okay. Ohio, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember Peacocks Springs Park outside of Cleveland?
Yeah.
Okay. We started there. Chippewa Lake?
Chippewa Lake, yeah.
Okay.
Still there as a kid.
Yeah. When we were at Chippewa Lake, I hired my first woman animal keeper dietitian. She did a wonderful job, Donna Korn. She went on to get her PhD and do work on the 13-line squirrel out west. I hired women to be animal keepers, and I don't mean to brag about this, before municipal zoos did. It was always a man's world. The women did a magnificent job. The diets looked better. The cages were cleaner. The animals were happier. After I did this for a couple years, we traveled around. We're always visiting zoos. And I told the zoo directors, why aren't you putting women in here? What do you mean, women? I said, they'll do a good job for you. Today, there are more women animal keepers in zoos than men. They dominate the field.
It's like lawyers.
And I was one of the few women back then. You had women that were born into the families that were like on circuses that would work with animals. I married into it. So women have come a long way in the animal field, but I'm especially proud in the zoo world that they dominate now in all capacities. My daughter-in-law, Kelly, was the first general curator, female general curator at the zoo. And we still have a woman, Liz, that's the general curator at the zoo. In other words, general curator, you are in charge of the whole cotton picking animal collection. And the animal keepers work under you. And it's a good relationship that she has with everyone. So, but yes. Equal rights? Absolutely. Should a woman be given a position just because she's a woman? No, she better have the expert.
Did you run into challenges trying to put women in there? Did you run into challenges trying to bring women into the?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Did you run into challenges bringing women into the food?
Was it a challenge?
Yeah.
No.
Did you run into any
The
challenges?
resistance.
Any challenges?
Yeah.
Should, all right, don't lecture me when I get home. I didn't put my hearing aids in.
Did you run into any challenges?
Problems.
Oh, problems with women?
No, bringing women in,
No.
you know, from.
No, they were anxious to do it.
Okay.
No, they were anxious to do it. And they got their degrees in order to do it.
What about outside, I mean, not from them, because they would, you know, probably like that position, but what about from the community or outsiders? Was there any challenges to having women do those jobs?
No,
No,
I don't think so. No, the whole picture in zoos have changed to where they're female dominated. Can guys still be working in a zoo? Absolutely. But they're working along with women.
Right. I can see how they would be good at, they're naturally nurturing, you know, so it helps. taking
Yeah,
care
I
of the
mean,
animals.
most of the keepers at the zoo today are women. And what's nice, the zoo has reached such a point, when I was still there, oh, I got to share one other thing with you that I'm so proud of. Okay, as what you call a C Corp, in other words, we're privately owned, we decided we wanted to be part of the big zoo world, which means you had to be a member of the American Zoological Association. So Dave and Tim said, Mom, let's go for it. Okay, let's try it. Well, it was a 3-year process. The information was a 3-inch, 3-ring notebook. You had visitors from zoos, veterinarians, zoo directors, and general curators. And they went through all our animal files. They checked every animal. They talked to every employee. I mean, it was thorough. Turned everything in. And Dave and Tim were invited to Colorado Springs to go before the 15-man board for questions. And they went in, answered the questions, and said, you may be excused. As David described them, they were all stone-faced. Now, you're talking about people with the Los Angeles Zoo, the Bronx Zoo, Lincoln Park, I mean, big zoos. So they said, you may be excused. So they went, sat down, and they no sooner got their butts on the seat, they were called back. And Dave said, well, that didn't take long, did it? And they went in. 15 men stood up and applauded them and said, welcome to the AZA. Do you know what that meant to us? To be a private, family-run, operated place, to be in the same association with all the big zoos. It was, tears were in my eyes when the boys called me and said, we made it, Mom, we made it. So as they were walking down the hall, Tim said, what's next, Dave? And he said, to stay in the AZA. You go through that every 5 years. It's not a done deal. It's every 5 years you go through that same process of the paperwork and the physical coming and checking everything. So we've had a great, yes, ma'am.
Go ahead and
Okay, we've had a good run there. We have taken the zoo from when I took over from the Fleischmans, it was running into the red. Mr. Fleischmann was subsidizing it to the point I could bring it out of the red. And we had, when I was there, we had 40 employees. And now I think they've almost doubled that. But nobody ever missed a paycheck. Do you realize when Disney came, how that changed the tourist industry in this part of the world? You know, it used to be people come down one coast and go up the other coast. When Disney became a center to draw everyone, and believe me, it was new. We had to rediscover ourselves, and that's when we knew our zoo had to be very interactive with people. We would do small shows. We would have animal talks, animal lectures. We'd be out on the trails with the people. So it wasn't just a walkthrough thing, that people could be interactive with everyone. Yes, ma'am.
Two-part question. What is your fondest memory, and what is the worst memory that you have of everything that you've done?
I would say the fondest memories are when I was in with the cats. To go up to a lion and tiger and go nose to nose with them, and the tigers almost purr, and the lions go, It's a good sound. That's what I miss the most, is my interaction with the animals. The worst is when I walked out of there for the last time in 2006.
Did you ever go back?
Yes, I go back, to visit, but it's not the same as being in charge. We had a wonderful crew. We were interactive. Today, the zoos are very departmentalized. In my day, and it'll never be this way ever again, if we were short, everybody pitched in. It doesn't work that way anymore. Camille, that was my assistant for years. If I had a shipment come into the gift shop, she'd be out there. She was office. She didn't care. She was out there helping me price merchandise. We did everything. Yeah. Do I miss it? Yes. Do I wish I had a couple $1,000,000 to build another one? You better believe it. No. Any other questions? Because I've just been...
Why do they have 5 male giraffes?
Because that's what's available. And they do not have the, I don't want to say permission, but in the zoo world, breeding is controlled. Mm-hmm. And until they get any females in there, they're not a breeding facility for giraffes.
Do they anticipate being one?
That I don't know. I don't know.
Because they're so cute when they're first born.
Yes, they are. But I'll tell you.
Yes.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
My son, Timber, is one of the giraffes. And
Okay.
Tim, at the end of the day, will go back there and he'll have some treat. And Timber just comes up and nuzzles him. See, those are the things that money can't buy
Yeah.
when an animal comes to you. Do you have anything to add, Bob, before I...
Well, I could bring it another hour or so.
He's been very supportive of my work.
There were a lot of things that I was able to meld into when I met you, and we eventually got married, and that the transportation of it, for instance, that you always left early because you had to get up there and do
Oh, yeah.
the paperwork of the whole thing in the spring, and then the animals were transferred up there 2 or 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
And
Taking...
I was able to take care of that and drive the truck out there.
Yes, Bob was great on, well, he backed me up so much in what I would do, but we had 2 collections we kept here in Naples. One collection would go to Ohio. Now, Endangered Species Act that went through in 1973, for every state we went through, we had to have special paperwork to bring that animal into the state and out of the state. And it was a 1-inch binder. And so traveling with the animals, it's quite a job. So that was always a big job, getting them back and forth. And gratefully, 30 years of traveling and never had an accident. Thank the Lord for that.